It is July, and your dahlias are finally taking off, growing fast, getting tall, covered in buds, promising you that spectacular wall of blooms every dahlia grower waits all year for. And this is the exact month you can quietly ruin it. Not just this year's flowers, the plant itself. Here is what almost nobody tells you. A dahlia is not like most plants in your garden. Because underneath the soil sits a tuber, a living root that you dig up and save every fall to grow again the next year. So a dahlia is really two plants in one. The show above the ground and the investment buried below it. And in July, with one common well-meaning habit, you can lose both at the very same time. There are 5 mistakes. And the third one is the one that does the most damage of all. Because it does not just cost you blooms this summer, it rots and kills the tuber underground where you cannot see it. So you get to fall, you go out to dig up your plant expecting to lift it and save it for next year, and you find nothing down there but brown, soft mush. That is mistake number 3. And the worst part is that you never see it coming because it happens in the one place you cannot look. By the end of this video, you are going to know exactly what to do over the next few weeks. How to get that huge, show-stopping fall display, and how to protect the tuber underneath at the same time. Exactly why each thing matters on a biological level, and exactly how to do it, with the amounts, the timing, all of it spelled right out. Not vague advice. The actual plan that decides whether your dahlias reward you for years or collapse and rot before the season is even over. But before any of it, there is one thing about dahlias that makes all 5 of these mistakes matter more than they ever would for any other flower in your garden. Let me show you what it is. Here is the one thing that changes how you have to think about dahlias. For most of the country, a dahlia is not a plant you grow once and forget. It is a plant you grow, dig up, store all winter, and replant the next spring. Year after year after year. Here is why that matters so much. In USDA zones 7 and colder, that tuber underground simply cannot survive a frozen winter in the ground. So every fall, you lift it out, you store it somewhere cool and dry through the winter, and you replant it come spring. In zones 8 and warmer, you are luckier. You can leave it in the ground under a thick layer of mulch. But either way, that tuber is the entire future of the plant, and it is exactly the thing that most of these 5 mistakes threaten. So, in July, understand what you are really doing. You are not just growing flowers for this summer. You are protecting an asset you are counting on for years to come, which means a mistake that rots the tuber is not a one-season loss. It is losing that variety, maybe a rare one, maybe an expensive one, for good. Gone. That is what raises the stakes on everything we are about to cover. So, do me a favor. Drop a comment and tell me your state and your USDA growing zone. Because whether you lift your tubers every fall or leave them in the ground, changes everything. And whether your July is hot and dry or hot and humid decides which of these 5 mistakes is coming for you hardest. I will keep coming back to your zone and your climate throughout this video, so pay attention when I call out yours. So let's start with the mistake that is happening right now, in July, as your plants shoot up toward the sky. Mistake number 1. Failing to stake and support your dahlias, right now, before they actually need it. In July, they are growing fast, getting tall, putting on all that heavy, leafy weight. And then, one summer thunderstorm rolls through, one strong gust of wind, and you walk out to find your best plant snapped clean off at the base. All that growth, all those buds, gone in a single second. Here is the mistake: waiting until the plant is already big or already flopping over to start thinking about support. By then, it is too late. And worse, driving a stake into the ground right next to an established plant risks spearing straight down through the tuber you cannot see. Here is the biology and the physics of it. Dahlias, especially the tall varieties and those big dinner plate types, grow thick but somewhat brittle, hollow stems. And once the plant is carrying a full, heavy head of blooms, those hollow stems snap in wind and rain if there is nothing holding them up. And a snapped main stem can cost you the entire plant. So here is the fix, and the timing is everything. Stake at planting time. And if you missed that, stake right now, while the plant is still small enough to manage, driving the stake in a few inches away from the crown so you do not hit the tuber underneath. Use a sturdy 5 to 6 foot bamboo cane, a wooden stake, or a length of rebar for the tall types. Or drop a tomato cage over the bushier ones. Then, as the plant grows, loosely tie the main stems to the stake with soft twine, adding a new tie every foot or so, loose enough that it never cuts into the stem. One note on variety. Your low bedding and border dahlias may not need staking at all, but any tall or dinner plate variety absolutely does. No exceptions, and dial it to your region. This one bites hardest anywhere you get summer thunderstorms and gusty wind. The Midwest, the South, anywhere with those afternoon storms rolling through. Here is the honest truth. It always feels too early to stake. Right up until the storm that proves it wasn't. And the bonus. A well-staked plant also holds its blooms up off the ground and open to the moving air. And that sets up the disease prevention we are going to get to later. Now, staking keeps the plant standing. This next mistake decides whether it actually covers itself in flowers or just sits there, tall and green and bare. Mistake number 2. Leaving your dahlias completely alone and never cutting them. It feels kind. It feels like you are letting the plant just do its thing. And it is exactly why you end up with a tall, leggy plant and a fraction of the flowers you could have had. There are 3 related techniques people skip here, and each one does a different job. Let me give you all 3. First, pinching. Early in the season, when the plant is about 12 to 16 inches tall, you snip out the very top of the central growing stem. Now, this feels completely wrong, like you are hurting the plant. It does the exact opposite. By removing that main growing tip, you force the plant to send its energy out into side branches. So instead of one tall, floppy stalk, you get a bushy plant with many stems. And every single stem is a new flowering site. So pinching one plant gives you dramatically more blooms. And if you are in early July and you never pinched, and the plant is still short enough, you can often still do it right now. Second, disbudding for bigger blooms. Look at the tip of a dahlia stem, and you will usually see a cluster of 3 buds, one large central bud, and 2 smaller ones on either side. Pinch off those 2 side buds, and the plant pours all of its energy into that single central bud, giving you one much larger showpiece flower. This is the exact trick the exhibition growers use for those giant dinner plate blooms. And it is completely optional. Skip it and you simply get more flowers, just a little smaller. Third, and the most important one all summer long, deadheading. As your flowers fade, you have to remove them. Because the moment a dahlia sets seed, it thinks its whole job is done, and it stops making new buds. But when you cut off those spent, faded blooms, you trick the plant into flowering again, and again, right up until the first frost. Here is the key detail people get wrong. When you deadhead, do not just snip off the flower head. Follow the stem down and cut it back to the next set of leaves, or a main branch. That keeps the plant tidy and pushes out longer stems for the next flush. And how do you tell a spent bloom from a new bud? A new bud is round and firm. A finished one is cone-shaped and soft. Here is the honest truth. Deadheading is the single highest return habit in all of dahlia growing. A few minutes a week that literally doubles your season. And the bonus. Every stem you cut for a vase indoors is really just deadheading. So the more flowers you bring inside, the more the plant gives you. Quick honest note before the big one. If you are finding this useful, subscribing is simply the thing that tells YouTube to keep sending it your way. One click, and you keep getting this every week. That is the whole pitch. Now, mistake number 3. This is the one in the title. And it is the one that does not just cost you flowers this summer. It kills the tuber underground, the plant's entire future. And the cruelest part of all is that you do it out of love, trying to take care of your plant in the July heat, and you never see the damage until it is far, far too late. Remember what we established at the start. That tuber is the living root you are counting on to dig up and save this fall. Overwater it, and there will be nothing left down there to save. Here is the biology. A dahlia tuber sitting in constantly wet, soggy soil simply cannot breathe, because roots need air just as much as they need water. And in waterlogged soil, every one of those tiny air pockets fills up with water, and the tuber suffocates. Then the rot moves in. And with dahlias, it is a whole family of attackers. Soil-borne water molds like Pythium and Phytophthora, fungi like Fusarium and Rhizoctonia, and bacterial soft rot. Because a dahlia's fat, fleshy tuber is exactly the kind of soft tissue these organisms love, they turn it into brown, soft, foul-smelling mush. The growers are blunt about it. Tuber rot is almost always caused by overwatering or poor drainage. And the dahlia's tuberous root makes it especially vulnerable to soft rot. Now here is the July trap, the thing that fools everyone. In the heat, your plant wilts in the afternoon and looks desperately thirsty. So you water it more. But a dahlia that wilts in the hot afternoon and then recovers in the cool of the evening is usually not thirsty at all. It is just coping with the heat. And if you respond to that by soaking soil that is already moist, you drive it straight into rot. So here is the single most useful test in this whole video. Before you water, check the soil a few inches down. If the plant wilts in the day but perks back up by evening and the soil down there is still moist, do not water. That is heat wilt. But if it stays wilted even in the cool of the evening and the soil underneath is soggy, that is not thirst. That is rot setting in. And more water is the very last thing it needs. So, here is the fix. Water the right way. Dahlias want a deep watering just 2 to 3 times a week, enough to keep the soil like a well-wrung sponge. Moist, but never soggy. Never a little bit every single day. Always water at the base, and never let the plant sit in waterlogged ground. And here is the foundation fix, the one that really matters. Drainage. And this is mostly decided before you ever plant. Dahlias must have well-draining soil. So heavy clay needs compost worked into it, or you plant in raised beds or mounds, because a tuber in soggy clay is a tuber on death row. And for containers, the pot must have drainage holes, and it must never sit in a saucer full of water. Here is the honest, sober truth. You cannot save a fully rotted tuber. It is gone. So this one is entirely about prevention. Getting the drainage and the watering right so the rot never starts in the first place. But there is a rescue if you catch it early. If you see a stem going soft and brown right at the base, cut away that affected growth. Stop watering, let the soil dry out, and improve the drainage. You may just save the rest of the plant. And the bonus is the biggest one in this entire video. Nail your watering and your drainage, and you have protected not just this summer's plant, but every single future plant that tuber will ever give you. Quick one before the next mistake, because we are talking about rot, and that is exactly where this comes in. That one humble brown bottle of hydrogen peroxide in your shed has real, limited uses right here. A dilute soak to help with the early stages of rot on a tuber. A rinse to sanitize your cutting tools between plants, so you are not spreading disease from plant to plant as you deadhead. And a diluted spray as a knockback on powdery mildew, which we will get to in just a minute. Everything I know about that bottle. The genuine garden uses, the exact dilution for each one, and just as importantly, the things it will not do, so you do not kill a plant trying, is collected in one place. It is the Hydrogen Peroxide Playbook. All 31 garden uses, the exact dilution for each so you are never guessing. Sourced from real horticulture, not the usual internet myths with a clip and pin chart for your shed wall. 25 pages, $27. Link in the description. Now stay with me, because mistake number 4 is the feeding mistake that gives you a big, beautiful, leafy green plant with almost no flowers on it at all. Mistake number 4. Feeding your dahlias too much nitrogen. Your plant is getting big and green and lush, so you keep feeding it the general purpose fertilizer to push it along. And you end up with a giant, leafy green bush, and hardly a flower on it. Here is the symptom. A big, vigorous, dark green plant, absolutely loaded with foliage, with very few blooms. And that growth is soft, which makes it more prone to problems. Here is the biology. Fertilizer has 3 numbers on the bag: nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. And nitrogen, the first one, drives leafy green growth. Flowering, on the other hand, runs on phosphorus and potassium, the second and third. Now, dahlias are heavy bloomers that specifically want a low nitrogen, high phosphorus feed. So a general, high nitrogen fertilizer does exactly the wrong thing. It pours all the plant's energy into leaves at the direct expense of the flowers you are growing it for. And there is a second cost. All that soft, nitrogen-fed growth is far more susceptible to the powdery mildew and the rot we have been talking about. So here is the fix. Switch to a fertilizer formulated for blooms, one that is lower in nitrogen and higher in phosphorus and potassium. The kind labeled for roses or tomatoes, or simply bloom, works well. Start feeding about a month after planting, or once the sprouts are well established, and feed on a schedule, roughly every 7 to 14 days for a water-soluble feed, or a slow-release fertilizer at the rate on the label. And here is a refinement. Once the plant starts setting buds, some growers shift to an even higher potassium feed to really push the flowering. Now the honest part. Do not overdo it. For a granular feed, no more than about once a month. Always follow the label. And never assume that more fertilizer is the fix for a struggling plant, because too much causes just as many problems as too little. One note for containers. Potted dahlias need more regular feeding than ones in the ground, because the nutrients wash out every time you water. And the bonus. Get the feeding right, and you flip the whole plant. From making leaves to making the flowers you actually wanted all along. And that soft, overfed growth is especially vulnerable to the 2 things that hit dahlias hardest in the heat of July, which is the 5th and final mistake. Mistake number 5 is really the 2 things July throws at your dahlias that panic people the most. The heat that makes them stop blooming, and the white powder that creeps across the leaves. And handled wrong, both of them get worse. Let's take the heat first. Here is the truth. When your dahlia slows down or stops blooming in the July heat, the problem is very often just the heat. Not you. Dahlias love warm days, but they want cooler nights. And when temperatures stay consistently above about 90 degrees, they get stressed, and they may take a break from blooming, dropping, or stalling their buds to conserve energy. But here is the key. This is temporary, and it is physical. The plant almost always resumes blooming when the weather cools down in late summer. In fact, that is exactly why August and September are the peak dahlia months, not July. So here are the fixes. Keep the water steady, because heat plus drought swings cause far worse bud drop than heat alone. In the hottest regions, give the plant some afternoon shade or protection during the most extreme heat of the day. And the long game is choosing heat-tolerant varieties if you garden in a hot climate. And once you understand that July's smaller or paused blooms are just the heat, you can stop panicking, stop overwatering, stop overfeeding, and simply wait for the fall show. Now, one honest note on mulch, because the growers genuinely disagree here. Some dahlia growers say skip the mulch entirely, because dahlias like warm roots and mulch harbors slugs. But in serious July heat, most recommend a thin 2-inch layer of mulch to keep the soil moisture even and the roots cooler, kept a few inches back from the stem to prevent rot. So the honest answer is, a light mulch in real heat, held off the stem, and keep an eye out for slugs. Now the second thing, powdery mildew. That white, talcum powder coating that shows up on the leaves in the heat, and especially as the summer turns humid. It rarely kills a dahlia outright, but it weakens the plant, and if it gets bad and goes untreated, it can eventually work its way down into and damage the tubers. The fix is mostly prevention through AIR flow. Space your plants properly, about 18 to 24 inches, and more for the dinner plates, which you set at planting. Water at the base, never on the leaves. Remove affected leaves promptly, and treat with a fungicide or that dilute peroxide knockback if it takes hold. Here is the honest part. Mildew is often about your location and the weather. Some spots just get it, so airflow and acting early matter far more than blaming yourself. And dial it to your region. Hot, dry climates fight the heat stress and the bud drop. Humid climates fight the mildew, and the bonus ties it all together. The very same spacing and base watering that stop mildew also help keep that tuber from rotting. So let me pull all 5 of these together, because they are really one single idea, and it changes how you see the whole month of July. Before we do one thing for me. Think of one person you know whose dahlias always flop over in a storm, or who lost their tubers over the winter and never understood why. Send them this video. Just the link. It might save both their flowers and their tubers. Now let me pull all 5 of these together, because they are not really 5 random rules. They are 3 disciplines that carry your dahlias through July with a huge fall show ahead of them and the tuber safe underground. The first discipline is support and shape. That is mistakes 1 and 2. Stake early, so the summer storms do not take your plants. And pinch, disbud, and deadhead, so the plant pours everything it has into flowers. The second discipline is protecting the tuber. That is mistake 3, the big one. Water deeply, but only a few times a week, and never into soggy soil. And get the drainage right, because that tuber is the whole investment. The third discipline is feeding and weathering the heat with restraint. That is mistakes 4 and 5. Feed for blooms, not for leaves. And understand that July's heat and mildew are mostly the weather, not your failure, so you do not panic your way into overwatering. Get those 3 right, and July hands you off to the very best months of the entire dahlia year. And notice the thread running through all of it. It comes back to the one idea from the very start. A dahlia is two plants in one, the show above the ground and the investment below it. And the grower who protects both is the one still growing that same beloved variety 5 years from now. And listen, if you are in your 50s, 60s, or beyond, dahlias are one of the great late-life garden loves. The armfuls of impossible technicolor blooms you cut for the kitchen table, for a neighbor, for a grandchild's hand. And the quiet pride of digging up your tubers each fall and knowing you will do it all again, better, next year. You have earned that. A garden that gives you more every single season. Not a bed of collapsed stems and rotted tubers. So, if this saved your dahlias or saved your tubers, subscribe and stick around. We do this the honest way here in the Forgotten Knowledge Library. Real horticulture, exact amounts, and we tell you straight when something is just a myth. Next time, another flower, another forgotten job that everyone gets wrong. What actually works, and what people swear by that, simply does not. So go check your dahlias, stake them, deadhead them, and above all, before you water them, check that soil, because that tuber is worth protecting. I will see you in the next one.